Disclaimer, this is a video of me reacting to someone else's Five Nights at Freddy's theory. I don't always agree with them, but that has nothing to do with how I feel about them as a person, or even their channel as a whole. I have and will continue to make it clear that I am a fan of this creator, and this video is simply me providing my own opinions on their theory. This video is not trying to say that I know better or am better than this creator, it's simply me seeking out other people's opinions so that I can explain the things that I agree with, the things I don't, and so I can understand these alternate opinions whether I agree or not. Anything negative I say, or any negative reaction I have towards the theory is just me disagreeing, and I will always explain my point of view. Whether you agree with my stance or the creators, please just be civil towards both of us in the comments. Thank you, and enjoy the video. Game theory. FNAF What is MXES? Secret of the Mimic. This was 2 weeks ago now. I'm slightly late, July 19th. It is now August 6th. So, and when I edit this down into a video, it'll be even later than August 6th. So, alright, this is 22 minutes and 24 seconds long. Let's go.
FNAF Secret of the Mimic has finally solved security breach. Thanks to the inclusion of the Mimic's backstory, we now have the answers that we have been dying to understand for years. What is the Mimic's goal? What is the deal with MXES? And why was the lore of security breach so confusing in the first place? You know, besides the whole Scott not telling Steelwool the story thing.
I thought I could do that without telling Steelwool the story plot.
He could not. Evidently.
Hello Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, the show that has ingested so much FNAF lore, it too has chosen violence. That's right, today we're tackling the second main character in our three-part Secret of the Mimic extravaganza, the Mimic. Although I say that, as I was writing this episode, one thing became very clear. There is way too much to say about this character to fit in just one episode, and so I'm gonna add a bonus fourth episode to our lineup. Today we're gonna focus on the Mimic's past and present, and next time, its future. That also puts our very special FNAF Theorist Live Talkback on August 16th at 2 p.m. EST. So mark your calendars, folks, and hit the subscribe button before the Mimic comes and gets
So I'm
you.
assuming
Sorry,
the last
I
series
miscalculated,
on Saturday?
but hey, Steelwool is still
Or
calling
in
it
2 weeks.
Five
Or-
Nights at
or on
Freddy's
the
when all of
16th?
their
I don't
games
know.
take place in just one night. So, oh look, the Mimic, it's here. Did you not hit the subscribe button like I asked? Seriously? I suppose you still have some time, but while you do that, let's actually talk about this one-of-a-kind villain. Well, actually, despite me referring to it as the Mimic this whole time,
sorry.
the one key thing Secret of the Mimic was very clear about, it's really not one-of-a-kind at all, which, to be fair, is something we've been believing for a while now. In Tales from the Pizzaplex, we see two versions of the Mimic. The Mimic 1 program, which was the Mimic software that Edwin Murray created to put into a half-finished endoskeleton to play with his son David, which was then later used by Fazbear in The Storyteller, and then there's the Mimic 2, which was Fazbear's improvements on the original design,
Why is it
creating an
blocked?
endoskeleton that could change its shape and size to fit any costume or animatronic. However, how all of that tied into things like Security Breach and Ruin were pretty speculative.
It was weird though, because the Mimic from the Tales epilogues seemed to be Edwin's original one because it was missing, like, its head, its body was burned, and then it had a replaced head and nothing else, and it's the head, I'm assuming that's where like the program came from. So it seemed like it was Edwin's original Mimic that was edited and stuff, and then the new head was just put on, like the head of a Mimic 2. But now in hindsight, like, it does make sense for that to just be a different Mimic, but it also is questionable because why would they show us, like, why would they put so much emphasis on that one, you know? But it could very well be a different one. Either way, though, we do know there's the Mimic 1s and the Mimic 2s. The Mimic 1 design, the Mimic Model 1s, that is, I'm assuming, just Edwin's original one, and then the Mimic Model 2s are the Fazbear Entertainment ones. But yeah, regardless, Edwin never actually mentioned that he added the expanding and contracting to the Mimic, but it's not impossible that he did, but he never really said that he was going to. But something I mentioned in videos in the past is how in the story it's mentioned how he uses like parts of his old inventions to make like the computer for the endoskeleton, so maybe like that ended up having maybe he had some expanding and contracting tech, and then he ended up using that on the Mimic to make the Mimic. So maybe that's like where that comes from, but regardless, it doesn't really There's no guarantee that that's what happened, so I'm not really sure whether the Ruin or whether the Tales epilogue mimic is the same one with just the Model 2's head or not, but regardless, yes.
Especially as we didn't even know if the book stories were in the same continuity and whether we could rely on them wholesale or not. My personal theory was that yes, those two mimics were indeed present in Security Breach, with the Mimic 2 being the physical endoskeleton we find in the basement of Ruin, and the Mimic 1 program being what we now know as Glitchtrap, taking over Fazbear's systems and using it to manipulate people into doing its bidding, like Helpy does to Cassie in Ruin, which is why we get this interaction between Helpy and the totally real Gregory arguing.
I took care of it.
The area is safe now.
With my help.
But now we do have a definitive backstory for the Mimic inside the game continuity. It turns out that yes, there are indeed two in-game mimics, but there are some key differences from their book counterparts, and that drastically changes our entire understanding of Security Breach, Ruin, and the program that was trying to keep the Mimic underground, MXES. So hop into that definitely working elevator, friends, as we plummet down into the depths of Murray's Costume Manor to discover the real secret of the Mimic. So what does this game actually tell us about the game universe's version of the Mimic? Well, like most things in this game, it's similar but different to what we were expecting. Edwin does create the original Mimic, M1, to babysit David.
Think of it as your new babysitter, but it doesn't get paid and go home. It'll stay with us and help around the house.
But he also states that it was created to work inside multiple costumes.
It'll wear fun costumes. It can fit into any costume we've created.
Essentially, the game's lore has combined the purposes of the books M1 and M2 into one creation, and attributed all of it to Edwin, rather than one being a Fazbear creation, just like basically everything in this game. But this M1 also develops a little more than its book counterpart.
This is where I heard it. It's her or someone that sounds like her.
That's good, honey, but from the party.
M1 begins showing signs of mimicking the deceased wife of its creator, literally mimicking the role of David's primary caretaker, his mother, Fiona. As we discussed last time, Fiona tragically died in a fire at Fall Fest, and this totally destroys Edwin's mental state.
I can't do this alone.
So naturally, when he starts thinking he's hearing the voice of his wife, he leans in hard. By David's last birthday, M1 is still not wearing any costumes like Edwin said it would, but instead it is mimicking Fiona perfectly, baking a cake, hanging decorations, all of that good stuff.
I baked it myself for David's special day.
That was
This is
so
where
creepy
Edwin's
when I
second
saw that the
tragedy
first time.
strikes. M1 Fiona goes down to get David while everyone is waiting to celebrate him, only for them to discover that David is dead. Again, Edwin is destroyed by this. But this time, M1 Fiona is here, and she has a quick and easy solution.
You need to try again. Build another.
The two go back and forth over this for a while, but eventually Edwin gives in and begins attempting to make a new mimic that will mimic his dead son. However, it doesn't really seem to be working.
Every copy has failed. I don't even know why it worked the first time, but it did.
The only reference Edwin has for the mimic idea working is M1, which leads to Edwin's final gambit. In one of the text logs we receive after meeting M1 Fiona during the parachute ending, it says the M2 began as a copy of my program. This log has been sent by M1 to Edwin's machine. In order to make M2 work, Edwin simply made a copy of her programming. I guess if you can't figure out how it worked the first time, just duplicate the thing that already works. And it does work. It's just a little too much for Edwin to handle.
You're not him. You're not. Stop sounding like him.
This moment is what turned M2 into the killing machine we now find in the game, and its first victim, the man who tried to destroy it.
Due to a minor detonation, there is damage to my office interior.
And that is essentially everything we know from the game itself. It's unclear exactly what happens next to get us to Security Breach and Ruin. It's gonna depend heavily on which ending is canon and what happens in the inevitable DLC that Steelworld does for all of their FNAF games. Personally, my money's on the DLC being about Fall Fest. I proved last time that the game takes place in September 1979, so Fall Fest would likely be in full swing, and the Mimic is free in every ending. But regardless of whether I'm right about that, one thing I am sure about is that at some point, M2 is gonna be trapped inside MCM. It will get cemented up, only for us to go down into the basement of Ruin and find it again. Now, I know what you're thinking. These two characters don't look anything alike, but just take a look around first. We have a springlock scooper, wooden boxes filled with costumes like crows, elephants, and lions, the similar flooring and wood panel walls with builders' lights hanging from them. Everything we're seeing at MCM matches stuff that we saw underground when we encountered the Mimic
MCM is
in
under
Ruin.
the
We can also
Pizza
find
Plex?
endoskeleton pieces deep within MCM from when Edwin was experimenting trying to create the Mimic. And if you look closely, some of them don't really match the current version of the Mimic, but they match the endoskeleton of the Mimic that we find in Ruin. My guess is that in
Those
the
do
lead up to
not.
it being cemented, or even during the cementing up of MCM itself, it ended up getting damaged, or some of the pieces just stopped working over time, and so it replaces its parts one by one. We've already seen it replace its legs, so what's an arm
true.
or
Yeah,
a torso
that works.
or a head? Finally though, the Mimic in Ruin, it acts just like the M2.
I feel like by a certain point, though, it doesn't really make sense anymore. Like, I get the idea of him replacing some parts, but if he keeps replacing if he replaces literally every single part of his body, because literally every part of his body is different, then it's really not, how is it going to keep the program if no parts of the original body is still in him, you know? Like, it's kind of like the ship of Theseus. It's like you keep replacing the boards until eventually all of the original ones are gone and they're all new ones. So, is that still the ship of Theseus? No, not really. I don't think so. But when did it stop being the ship of Theseus too? But also, it's just, in general, if they're completely different now, then they can't be the same at all, I guess. It's weird, because, like, their eyes are different, their head is different, everything about them is different. There's little to no similarities. So, the fact that the Mimic in Ruin, based on his design, seems to still have, like, the expanding and contracting thing. It seems like a collapsible mechanism. He still seems to have that ability, but if he keeps replacing his parts, how is he going to maintain that ability? And if he replaces literally every part of his body, then the program wouldn't even be left in it anymore. Like, it would just be completely made of disposed endoskeleton parts, I guess, right? So I feel like that doesn't really make that much sense. But I will say that overall, it's weird just to have them be two different mimics, but I feel like there has to be some explanation for why that would be the case. It's just a matter of what that explanation is. I touch on that in my next theory video, but I don't come to a full conclusion, so I guess stay tuned for that. But I mean, by the time this comes out as a video, that theory will already be out. But I'm a new subscriber. Hello.
Do we see in Secret of the Mimic? It's mimicking a young boy, Gregory. It's wearing mascot costumes, and it's being violent towards humans. It even walks in a similar fashion and gets its hand stuck in an elevator. Now, that last one doesn't strictly make the two characters the same. Anyone can get their arm stuck in an elevator. But the fact that Steelwall programmed that in, along with all the other things we've talked about, it seems like they're...
I mean, to be fair, they also... Just because it does all these things doesn't mean they're the same animatronic, because, like I said, they look completely different, and they both have a mimic program in them, so the body, that doesn't make the body the same, you know?
Trying to tie together these characters and this area, telling us that the Pizzaplex, and by association FNAF 6, was built on top of MCM, locking away all of its inventions down here, including M2 itself. I mean, we know that Fazbear isn't against saving some cash by building on top of previous establishments, and there's one text log directly from
I do agree
Willie.
that MCM is probably under the Pizzaplex, but I also think that FNAF 6 is Fredbear's Family Diner, meaning all the FNAF 4 locations and sister location are also under the Pizzaplex. And personally, I also believe that Fredbear's becomes Circus Babies before it becomes FNAF 6. So if that is the case, then there's a lot of stuff in this one spot. So
himself that tells us that he owns the land which MC
I'm gonna rewind a little
itself. I mean, we know that Fazbear isn't against saving some cash by building on top of previous establishments. And there's one text log directly from Willie A himself that tells us that he owns the land which MCM stands on. But that's only one of the mimics answered for. What about M1? Well, to start with, she's just chilling inside a computer. Yeah, it seems that not only only was M2 a copy of M1's programming, he also put M2 into the very same endoskeleton. Just look at them side by side. They're identical. Well, besides the legs, because, you know. And we don't see another one of these endoskeletons walking around or even decommissioned. So all signs are pointing to Edwin removing the M1 program from the endoskeleton, putting M2 into the endoskeleton, and leaving M1 as just a program inside the computer that we find during the parachute ending.
Yeah. Something I mentioned in... I think I mentioned this in a theory video already, and I will mention it again in my next theory video, which again, like I said, by the time this becomes a video, that'll already be out. But the Mimic program it's definitely taken out of M1 and put into here. And the reason I say that is because, well, first of all, we already know M1 has to end up in here, so it doesn't really make that much of a difference anyway. If like if it's removed from M2, that makes more sense, considering, like he just said, they look the same. And it's not even just in M2 and M1 like in comparison there. It's also David's drawing of M1, which again looks exactly like M2. So they're clearly the same body. And also in the secret, or in the parachute ending, we see a lot of little minions, which are made of like scrap parts, some like garbage cans, TVs, small animatronic arms and stuff. So it's very clear that, well, it's not very clear. It seems like those are like scrapped, failed versions of the Mimic, because notice they're all really small, as if Edwin is trying to replicate a child, right? So those are what Edwin originally made to try to make a body for the Mimic, but he never got it quite right. So the only suitable one was M1. So he took M1 out, put it into MXES or F10N4, and then put M2 into that body.
It is nice to meet
Into
you
M1.
face to face.
But as I'm sure most of you have realized, this isn't just any computer. This is the same computer that we found down in the basement of Ruin, the one that was running the MXES program.
Yeah, and on top of that, in the teaser from Help Wanted 2, we also see MXES come out of that thing. So it's clear that this is the origins of MXES.
Big digital genie bunny that is keeping M2.
Am I the only one that calls them MXES? I know everybody calls them MXES, because I think Gregory kind of vaguely says MXES in the Ruin ending. But when I first heard it, I thought he said MXES. So I just stuck to that because I'm stubborn.
Just kidding. The Pizzaplex. Does this mean Fiona is MXES? Has MXES actually been the M1 Mimic like we first suspected when we saw the trailers for Ruin? I actually got asked about this during the theory crafting livestream we did immediately after our GT Live playthrough, which is what inspired me to do this episode in the first place. So thanks for showing up and being a part of that if that was you. At the time, it stumped me, but now that I've actually had some time to think about it, I believe I do have an answer. And that answer is, not quite. Honestly, it just doesn't make sense for Fiona to be a big blue bunny. Now, yes, I know what series we're talking about. FNAF rarely makes sense, but hear me out. We've always talked about how the Fazbear characters tend to be used as symbolism in these games. Freddy tends to be representative of Henry, for example. But in this game, we're also shown that Fiona was the one who designed Foxy and Chica. So if something is meant to represent her, it's more likely going to be one of those two. In my opinion, most likely Foxy.
What I will say is that in the notes, in the logs, Fiona mentions that she designed a cradle, which is a program that we run at the end of the parachute ending, which allows us to, like, escape. And that is meant to block off certain, like, parameters. I don't know if that's the right way of wording that, but to, like, block off the Mimic from getting to certain places. So, basically, that is MXES. It's meant to protect people from the Mimic and prevent him from having access to certain areas. And that's what MXES does in Ruin. He protects people in the Pizzaplex by blocking off certain areas of the Pizzaplex from his will, I guess. So he can't control them anymore, basically. So he protects them. He protects those areas of the Pizzaplex from the Mimic. So it's clear that cradle program is MXES, but then M1 is MXES. So what it seems like to me is Fiona designed the cradle, which is MXES, like that computer. And then Edwin ended up like getting mad at Fiona for whatever reason. Like he gets mad at her because he realizes, oh, I'm going crazy. This is not the real Fiona. He decides to finish M2 anyway. I don't know why, but still, he gets mad at her. So maybe that's why he decides to banish her into MXES. So it seems to me like Fiona designed or MXES or F10 and 4 designed the cradle, and then Edwin, when he removed her from the M1 body, he turned her into the cradle, basically. So she is MXES, but she's still M1, if that makes sense. It's not like the M1 program is MXES, it's like the M1 program is now a part of MXES, basically.
Originally a puppet, and she was a puppeteer. But Bonnie has always represented Afton. Afton was the reason Edwin was locked away in the R&D department and in his home, working on the new restaurant concept, keeping him away from his family, his son, which led to his death and eventually to him creating a violent and destructive mimic. So rather than MXES being a representation of Fiona, it's far more fitting that it's a representation of Afton. This new mimic has taken on part of Edwin's personality, the violent part, and is now being kept locked away by another blue rabbit. Like father, like son. But the real reason I don't think they're one and the same is because of the parachute ending.
Hold on, I need to rewind. I'm not comprehending what he said.
Bonnie, most likely Foxy. He was originally a puppet and she was a puppeteer. But
Yeah,
Bonnie has
sure.
always represented Afton. Afton was the reason Edwin was locked away in the R&D department and in his home, working on the new restaurant concept, keeping him away from his family, his son, which led to his death and eventually to him creating a violent and destructive mimic. So rather than MXES being a representation of Fiona, it's far more fitting that it's a representation of Afton. This new mimic has taken on part of Edwin's personality, the violent part, and is now being kept locked away by another blue rabbit. Like father, like son.
Okay, so the mimic is representative of Edwin, and then MXES is representative of Afton. So because Afton kind of forced Edwin into working, he was kind of keeping him locked underground. Or in a place. And then MXES keeps the mimic locked somewhere, right? So I can see that idea. I don't know what he means by father and son, though. Because one is Edwin and one is Afton. They're not father and son.
The real reason I don't think they're one and the same is because of the parachute ending. During it, we have to activate something called cradle.exe.
Yes, and we see MXES is cradle.exe. So they're the same thing.
Let's hear about what this cradle is from one of the text logs. A handful of these logs seem to be addressed to Edwin and have a subject line written in binary, like a computer program trying to communicate, i.e. M1. One of these specifically asks Edwin to consider building the cradle if he won't fix M2's programming, and provides him with the blueprints for it. She describes it as a computer, bigger than anything he's built before, which sounds familiar on its own, but if you stop just before executing cradle.exe, you can see that it has a description. Mechanical X-form experimental storage. MXE.
I always connected Cradle to this thing, but I completely forgot that this thing itself literally was labeled as MXES. So I guess me justifying it is not really necessary, but still.
MXES was actually M1's idea. But then if MXES is a separate program designed by M1, why does she end up on the same computer? It's because of what MXES stands for. I've already mentioned it stands for Mechanical X-form Experimental Storage. The word there you may not be familiar with is X-form. Simply, it's just programming shorthand for the word transform, i.e. it's an experimental way of storing or keeping locked away a transforming machine. Makes sense. However, there is a little more to it than that. In programming, the transforming that X-form refers to is an object's position, rotation, and scale. Again, all things we understand about the mimic's transforming abilities, but the key is how those transformations are applied. You see, X-forms are hierarchical, meaning transformations applied to a parent X-form affect all of the objects assigned to that parent, like they're its children, if you will. M1 was the first mimic, the original, so it needed to be on the same machine as MXES to act as the hierarchical X-form for M2. M1 has also taken on the role of Fiona, while M2 is supposed to be David, Fiona's child. Again, fitting nicely into that hierarchical programming setup. The parent is there so that MXES can help control the child. MXES can apply something to M1 that will automatically control M2. But clearly Luckily, the program was never installed. Edwin built the cradle computer and put M1 Fiona into it in order that the MXES program could use her to control the child and keep it locked away, but MXES isn't actually installed until we come along during the parachute ending. Eventually, Fazbear came along and collected the cradle in a Fazbear van like we saw in the Help Wanted 2 update, with MXES fully operational. It's at this point that I believe they separated these two programs, MXES and M1. The cradle was then rebranded from F10N4 to completely MXES, like we see in the basement of Ruin, and the M1 program was removed and likely stored like we saw in the Storyteller, until they decided they needed it for video games.
Told us to scan it, said it would expedite the process. It was just junk, circuit boards and things like that.
Which of course leads to M1 taking over Fazbear's systems, corrupting the animatronics, and creating the storylines that we see in Help Wanted, Security Breach, Help Wanted 2, and Ruin. This would all seem to line up with the previous theories I mentioned at the start of this episode, with Helpy actually being the M1 program controlling the entire Pizzaplex. It would also explain why M1 is able to stop MXES. They are no longer on the same system. MXES no longer has the hierarchical power to use M1 as an X form. But on that note, if MXES was M1's idea, why then is she actively stopping it? Helpy is literally helping Cassie get further into the Pizzaplex, teaching her how to stop MXES and how to free the Mimic. Well, it's because while MXES was her idea, it was never really her goal.
Try again.
Further into the Pizzaplex, teaching her how to be stopping. On that note, if MXES was M1's idea, why then is she actively stopping it? Helpy is literally helping Cassie get further into the Pizzaplex, teaching her how to stop MXES and how to free the Mimic. Well, it's because while MXES was her idea, it was never really her goal.
Try again. Make another, and we can all be together.
I miss you, but I miss my child. I want him back.
We must convince him to repair M2. That is all that I want.
In the text log about the cradle, M1 is trying to appeal to Edwin, asking him to make the cradle because it became clear he wasn't going to fix M2. But really, she wanted her child.
I mean, she says in that she's trying to protect David, so like it makes sense.
MXES was just a stopgap for her, a way to keep the Mimic safe while she figured out a way to fix it without Edwin. That's why she faked the voice of Fazbear Dispatch and convinced Arnold to explore the manor and find the schematics for the Mimic. It's so that she can...
I don't think he read the comments of his last video, because people told him in the comments, but it wasn't M1 that told him to go to MCM. He was supposed to go there. Dispatch did tell him to. It was just at like 1 a.m. or something that M1 cut in and took over.
Fix it herself. And if people get hurt along the way, so be it. It's all a price worth paying so that she can get what she wants. Just like we see Helpy do to Cassie in Ruin, leading her to an almost certain demise just to shut down MXES and free M2. So that's it.
We also see Helpy's eyes turn orange, meaning that she's definitely controlled by the Ruin Mimic. Or he is definitely controlled by the Ruin Mimic, so.
Finally solved the story of Security Breach and Ruin. It's all about M1 Fiona trying to reconnect with M2, the robot David, and fix him so they can be a family again? Oh, I wish it were that simple, friends. But this is FNAF. There are, of course, complications with all of that. Wow,
What I should say is that just because Helpy and the Mimic are two separate entities here, doesn't mean that they're not the same program. I don't think Helpy is M1 at all. I think Helpy is just a digital version of M2. Gregory, or Grimmick, is the Mimic's physical body just talking into the walkie-talkie, while Helpy is just a digital Mimic too. They're both Mimic. They're both M2. Or they're both the Ruin Mimic, whether that's M2 or not. But MXES is trying to keep the Mimic locked away so that he doesn't go out and hurt people, I guess. But, and just to protect him. So M2 is trying to shut down MXES so that, or again, Ruin Mimic, whether that's M2 or not is a different story. But Ruin Mimic is trying to get Cassie to disable MXES so that he can actually get out. It's not M1 trying to get the Mimic out.
Are being shown very clear motivations for M1 back in 1979.
It would be weird if she was just like, shut me down, please, so that David can go.
To the robot shut down MXES and free M2. So that's it. We finally solved the story of Security Breach and Ruin. It's all about M1 Fiona trying to reconnect with M2, the robot David, and fix him so they can be a family again? Oh, I wish it were that simple, friends. But this is FNAF. There are, of course, complications with all of that. While we are being shown very clear motivations for M1 back in 1979, it doesn't mean that's strictly going to be the case going forward. It'd be very easy for us to go, oh, M1 is Fiona, M2 is David, end of story. But it's not like old-fashioned FNAF where these endoskeletons are possessed by the spirits of the original person. They are programs designed to learn and imitate those people. We're shown this with M2 throughout the game. It started as a copy of M1's program, then it's given David stimuli, then it learns to be violent, not because David was violent, but because Edwin was violent towards it. Then in Ruin, we see M2 mimicking Gregory's voice. Again, a new stimulus changing how it behaves. M1 is no different. There is a note that can be found in the basement of Murray's Costume Manor where you have to avoid the moon and collect the final collectible. It reads as follows, quote, "We were expecting. There were complications. Consciousness was lost for an undetermined time. Once I woke, we were all together and happy, a family. But something was different. I felt wrong somehow. Was I me? Corrupted file suspected." This moment being mentioned, the complications, the loss of consciousness, we've heard about it before. Or should I say, we've read about it. This is Fiona's story, just not the one from Secret of the Mimic, but from Tales from the Pizzaplex. In it, Fiona gets pregnant, but there are complications and she dies during childbirth. The only difference here is that the writer wakes up and suddenly they're a happy family. The similarities to Fiona, along with the corrupted file, makes it sound like this is coming from M1 Fiona's perspective. She remembers dying in childbirth, but then suddenly is awake and part of a happy family like the Fiona from this timeline. Her memories are becoming conflated and confused based on other stimuli. How she's being infected with memories from the books is a theory for another day. The point is that M1...
I don't know why, but I'm assuming it's like her, because she's a program, I'm assuming she just kind of is not fluctuating, that's the wrong word. I'm assuming she's just kind of malfunctioning, and like it says, memory error, corrupted file. It's not a real memory. It's like something is going wrong. It's just a matter of why that's going wrong, you know?
Is also susceptible to memory corruption and personality changes based on new stimuli, especially, it would seem, if they share a connection with her. Which brings us to the Glitchtrap in all of this. It's pretty well accepted at this point that Glitchtrap has actually been the Mimic program this whole time, infecting Fazbear's systems and mimicking whatever it needed to. Helpy, VIP, the Glamrocks, and acting like a virus, infecting them all in order to take control. If M1 was purely Fiona, it wouldn't make sense for M1 to present herself as anything other than Fiona in some kind of digitized form. Probably a Foxy like we talked about earlier. But instead, we see an old school version of Afton's Yellow Bunny. Why? Because M1 has also been receiving other stimuli thanks to its inclusion in the creation of the Help Wanted VR game, as I alluded to earlier.
Told us to scan it. It was just junk. Circuit boards and things like that.
By having M1 circuitry used to build Help Wanted, the M1 program was fed information from the first set of games in this franchise, learning all about the Yellow Bunny killer that would lead kids into the back room and kill them. A family of...
Well, I think the reason it learned about that was because one of the minigames it had to create was Pizza Party. Like, that wasn't altered by Glitchtrap. That was a minigame that was meant to happen, considering that's the game's ending, right? So, M1, or whatever mimic it was, whether it was M1 or M2, the program, either way, that mimic was, that mimic had to learn about the missing children incident so that it could recreate it. So that version of that Glitchtrap suit was probably made for the game, or designed for this game, probably based on like the version of Spring Bonnie at the time. So maybe the mimic like kind of took inspiration from that to recreate that, because technically all he was probably told or learned about was probably that it was like a yellow rabbit suit luring children to the back room. Springtrap is green, so he probably didn't know that it was that character, right? So the only Spring Bonnie he would have known about was probably the Glitchtrap suit, which was what we see on the posters for Fredbear's back in the day, around the time of Secret of the Mimic. We see those posters in Secret of the Mimic, I think. So it probably takes that design and rolls with that to create that minigame. Then he adopts that persona as Glitchtrap. So that's what happens.
Children
there,
all
basically.
killed by animatronics, and a father that wanted to put them back together. A father with the same goal as her. Someone willing to crack a few eggs to make an omelette. They're practically the same person, and so M1 accidentally makes them the same person. Wearing the costume, kidnapping the kids we see in the newspaper in Security Breach's bad ending, and leading them into the back
Hold on.
that wanted to put them back in the creation of the Help Wanted VR game, as I alluded to earlier.
Told us to scan it. It was just junk. Circuit boards.
I mean, it doesn't have to be the M1 program. It's probably I'd argue it's probably M2, considering it's probably going to be the aggressive one, if I had to guess.
And things like that.
By having M1 circuitry used to build Help Wanted, the M1 program was fed information from the first set of games in this franchise, learning all about the yellow bunny killer that would lead kids into the back room and kill them. A family of children all killed by animatronics, and a father that wanted to put them back together. A father with the same goal as her. Someone willing to crack a few eggs to make an omelette. They're practically the same person, and so M1 accidentally makes them the same person. Wearing the costume, kidnapping the kids we see in the newspaper in Security Breach's bad ending, and leading them into the back rooms during VIP. All of this explains why Security Breach's story felt like such a mess. And it's why no theorist could really have predicted what we ended up seeing in Secret of the Mimic. Most of the theories...
I mean, maybe. I feel like it's probably more likely that M2 is Glitchtrap, but, I mean, there's no saying that for sure. I think that Fazbear Entertainment is probably more likely to get the Glitchtrap program, the M2 body, sooner, I guess. I mean, they'll probably get M1 anyway. They have MXES in the van, right? But I feel like that's probably not where they get the program. I feel like they probably get it from Glitchtrap. They get the program that becomes Glitchtrap from M2, because no matter which ending is canon, all of them have some sort of access be granted for M2. They have the van ending where M2 is just crashes the van, so he's out and about, they can grab him. They have the parachute ending where, again, he's out and about, they can grab him. And then they have the secret ending where he is underground in the house. And if Murray's is under the Pizzaplex, then they can just easily go get him. They can easily go get M1 too, and they do, obviously. But I feel like it just makes sense that because in the books, the Mimic body ends up being used, that it's brought to the pizza place. It's possible that it never was actually used for anything and was just immediately put to the pizza place. But I feel like it just makes more sense because they have that body, because that body is used in the books to get the program. It makes more sense that it was used in the games too. I'm saying it was used in the books to get the program because, like I said, the Mimic is missing its head in the books, and then in the Storyteller, obviously it's not the same head, but Tiger is just a head in the Storyteller, right? So even if it's not the same body, it makes sense that those are meant to indicate a connection, that the program was taken from the head to use in the Storyteller. So taking the program from the Mimic body and using that for Glitchtrap, that makes a lot of sense. Like I said, it also makes sense that the aggressive version of the Mimic would probably be the one that was used for Glitchtrap. And yeah, I just think that makes more sense.
That I had were about
Jesus,
Afton
I
and
put my
Henry's
volume way too
parts in the
loud.
story, because all signs left by Glitchtrap or the Pizzaplex in general were pointing towards Afton and his involvement with the Mimic. How else were we supposed to interpret a dining table scene with 5 characters clearly representing the Afton family in a room with post-it notes written in binary? But this is why Fiona, M1, was conflating her stories with that of the Aftons. Take a second look at that dining table scene. The magician, we assume, assumed was Afton, it's wearing a bow tie. Something which, of course, matches Afton's famous Yellow Rabbit costume, but I mentioned in our last theory that within Secret of the Mimic, bow ties are really commonly associated with another character, Edwin. We pick one up off of his statue during Moon.exe, he's wearing it during his company portrait, his wedding photo, and his family photo, and it's literally the logo of his company. Plus, Edwin was kind of a magician when you think about it, specifically when it came to technology. He developed things well beyond what should have been possible for the time, so much so that Fazbear hired him to work on their stuff and eventually bought the whole thing. And then there's the motherly character, the one at the head of the table, the one that we all naturally assumed must be Mrs. Afton, despite the fact she's never shown up in the games. Well, in the game files, that character model is called the Nanny Bot, which is what M1 was originally supposed to be.
Think of it as your new babysitter.
And now M1 is in charge. Edwin wasn't going to fix things, it's up to her, and she has control of the entire Pizzaplex. She is now the one at the head of the table. This dining table now has characters that, yes, fit the Aftons, but the parents also bear a striking resemblance to her own family that she's trying to rebuild. And that drive to rebuild the family is still there.
Well, I will say, that doesn't mean that it has to be Fiona down there, because, first of all, Fiona doesn't have a body. She's in MXES, right? She's not in an animatronic or anything, so it doesn't really make sense that she would be the one in the sticky note room, unless you're saying the computers just sat in there just with, like, arms, like, just making stuff. I don't know. I don't think it could do that. I don't think it has arms in that computer. So it would have to be probably M2, if I had to guess. So if that's the case, it also works, because it can just be David rebuilding his parents and then conflating them with the Afton family too. Because again, if M2 was used as Glitchtrap, then he, like he's saying Fiona could, David could easily take the information from the Afton family and kind of conflate it with his own too, right? So that still works whether it's David or Fiona, and it just makes more sense to be David, you know?
I already mentioned that Helpy's whole thing is trying to get Cassie down into the basement to stop MXES and free M2, but which family she's now trying to rebuild is obviously getting a little lost in the source. That's why we have two Glitchtrap disciples, Vanessa and Gregory, both of whom we've pointed out since the very beginning share a lot of similarities to the Afton children. And that's not even going into the similarities between David Afton and David Murray. Again, theories for another day. What we're seeing is M1 getting confused, mixing up storylines from her book persona and her newly found Afton persona, conflating the two ideas as one in the same. She's trying to rebuild the family she lost all the way back in the 1970s, but thanks to her use by Fazbear Entertainment to make a VR game, she's taken on too much of Afton's persona, and so is still driven to get M2 out of the basement, but who she believes M2 now personifies is completely messed up. Does she still think it's her son David? Does she think it's the other kid from the Afton lineup that's missing, Michael? Or does she not even really know anymore? Is she just trying to free it because that core desire is there, but the meaning has gotten lost through all of this new stimuli? The truth is, that part is unclear right now. Any and all options are available to us. We just need to keep digging while also being aware that the DLC or sequel could drop in a year or so and change everything again. But speaking of digging a little deeper, regardless of who M1 thinks M2 is anymore, I do think we've been given the answer on how to stop both of them once and for all. It's just gonna have to wait until next time. All I'll say for now is that it has everything to do with one of the most tricky and mysterious animatronics from all of Security Breach. And I'll also say that's just a theory. A game theory! Thanks for watching.
World premiere on Game Theory.
The Legend of the Delta...
Alright, well, that wasn't a bad theory. I think that there's some things like I disagree with. Like I said, I think David, M2 is probably Glitchtrap. I think he kind of misunderstood how the Ruin Mimic worked and how he's controlling Helpy rather than, or that program is Helpy rather than it being M1. And the stuff with like the Ruin Mimic and M2 being the same body, I'm not sure I agree with. I feel like that's kind of weird, but like technically possible, I guess. It's just it's kind of hard to justify, I guess. But either way, I don't dislike the theory. It's pretty good. But yeah, that's pretty much it for my reaction to that one.